Do you know what is happening inside your mind right now while you are listening to this? Right now, in this very moment, something extraordinary is occurring, and almost nobody ever stops long enough to notice it. You are a universe becoming aware of itself. You are the cosmos opening its eyes, and yet, here you are, sitting wherever you are sitting, perhaps feeling a little restless, perhaps feeling a little tired, perhaps feeling the quiet hum of some unnamed anxiety that you cannot quite locate. That strange sensation that something is slightly wrong, that life is slipping past, that you are somehow not quite where you are supposed to be, and you cannot figure out why. Most people cannot figure out why. The truth about reality that nobody talks about. A YouTube narration script, Thoughts of Alan Watts. They spend their entire lives searching for the reason behind that feeling, chasing it through careers and relationships and philosophies and religions, buying things and discarding things and beginning again. And the searching never quite ends. The hunger never quite disappears. And here is what is so strange about that. Here is what most people never pause to consider. The very act of searching might be the thing that prevents you from finding. The very effort to grasp reality might be the thing that makes it slip through your fingers like water, like smoke, like the morning light that fills a room and yet cannot be held in the hand. Welcome to the channel Thoughts of Alan Watts. And in this conversation, because that is what this is, a conversation across whatever strange distance exists between a voice and a listener, we are going to explore something that human beings have always danced around, without quite looking at directly. We are going to look at the nature of reality itself, not the way a scientist examines it, not the way a theologian declares it, but in the way that a person might look at their own hand and suddenly realize for the first time that they have never truly understood what that hand is, or where it comes from, or what it means that it exists at all. Right now, while you are listening to these words, your perception of reality might already be changing, not because of anything I am doing, but because attention itself is transformative. The moment you begin to genuinely pay attention to something, and I mean truly pay attention, not the half-distracted glancing we usually call awareness, but actual sustained noticing, something shifts. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. The familiar becomes utterly strange. And the reality you thought you understood begins to reveal itself as something far more mysterious, far more alive, far more astonishing than the flat picture of it you had been carrying around in your head. Most people never realize this. Most people live their entire lives inside a story about reality, rather than inside reality itself. And that is not an insult. It is simply what happens when you are a creature with a mind that is extraordinarily good at making maps. The trouble is that a map is not the territory. The word is not the thing. The description of the sunset is not the sunset. And yet we spend almost all of our waking hours living inside descriptions, living inside the maps, living inside the words, mistaking the menu for the meal, and wondering why we are still hungry. This is where everything changes. This is the place where philosophy stops being an intellectual game and starts being something immediate, something personal, something that touches the actual texture of your experience right now, in this moment, as you breathe and listen and exist. Because the question of what reality actually is, not what you have been told it is, not what science says it is, not what religion says it is, but what it actually feels like from the inside of being alive. That question, when you take it seriously, when you let it really land, has the power to transform everything. Quietly, gently. The way the dawn transforms the world, not by adding anything to it, but simply by making visible what was always already there. So let us begin at the beginning, or rather,
Let us begin at what appears to be the beginning, because one of the first things we discover when we start to actually look at reality is that it does not seem to have a beginning at all, and it does not seem to have an end, and everything we thought we knew about where things start and stop starts to blur and dissolve in the most fascinating way. Here is a simple question. Where do you end and the world begins? You will say, immediately and obviously, at my skin. My skin is the boundary. Inside the skin is me. Outside the skin is the world. This seems so obvious, so self-evident, so completely beyond question that it barely seems worth asking. But stay with it for a moment. Just stay with it, because the more you examine that boundary, the stranger it becomes. Your skin is not a wall, it is a membrane. It is permeable. It breathes. It allows things in and things out. Every breath you take is the outside world literally entering your inside world. Every time you exhale, your inside world streams out into the outside world. And this has been happening without interruption since the first moment you were born. Since before you were born, in fact, when your mother's body was doing this breathing for you, when the boundary between you and another living organism was not the boundary between self and other at all, but something altogether more intimate and more ambiguous. And what is your body made of? Every atom in your body was once somewhere else. The carbon in your bones was forged in the heart of a dying star, billions of years before the Earth existed. The water in your blood fell as rain, long before any human walked upon this planet. The iron that carries oxygen through your veins was scattered across the cosmos in some ancient stellar explosion. You are not separate from the universe. You are a temporary configuration of it. You are the universe having organized itself, just for a little while, into this particular shape, with these particular thoughts, listening to these particular words on this particular day. But here is the strange part. That knowledge for most people remains just that, knowledge, a fact, an interesting fact perhaps, the kind of thing you might mention at a dinner party and feel briefly clever about. But it does not land. It does not transform the experience of being here. You nod at it, and then you go back to feeling like a separate self, enclosed in a skin, surrounded by a world that is other, that is foreign, that must be negotiated with and competed against and survived. The knowledge sits in the mind like a photograph of a mountain sits in a drawer, technically present, but contributing nothing to the experience of actually standing on a mountainside in the wind, with your lungs full of cold air and your eyes full of sky. And this gap, the gap between knowing something and actually experiencing it, between the concept and the reality, between the map and the territory. This gap is where most of human suffering lives. This is the crack in the foundation of the ordinary human life, not the suffering that comes from genuine loss, from death, from illness, from injustice. Those sufferings are real, and they matter, and they belong to the full range of what it means to be alive.
But the constant low-level suffering, the background hum of anxiety and dissatisfaction and incompleteness that haunts most people most of the time, that suffering lives in the gap between the living reality of what you are and the conceptual story you have been taught to tell yourself about what you are. And the story you have been taught to tell yourself about what you are, let us look at that story. Let us really look at it, because it is so familiar, so deeply embedded, that it is very nearly invisible, like water to a fish, like the air we breathe. We do not notice it because we have never, for the most part, experienced anything different. The story goes something like this. You are a self. You were born at a particular moment. You have a name. You have a history. You have a personality with certain characteristics. You are located in a body. That body moves through space and time. You are separate from other selves. You have desires and fears. You are heading toward a future that you must work to secure. And eventually, and this part of the story is usually kept in the background, usually not examined too closely,
Eventually you will die, and the self will cease to exist, and this is terrible. And the appropriate response to this knowledge is a more or less constant background anxiety that you manage as best you can through distraction and ambition, and the careful construction of a life that feels solid enough to take the edge off the terror. Now, there is nothing wrong with being a self. There is nothing wrong with having a name and a history and a body that moves through space. All of that is real. All of that is happening. The trouble is not with any of those things individually. The trouble is with the interpretation. The trouble is with the invisible assumption buried at the heart of the story. The assumption that the self is what you fundamentally are.
The assumption that the separate, enclosed, skin-bounded organism is the basic unit of reality. The assumption that the boundary between you and everything else is the most important fact about existence. Because what if it is not? What if the boundary between you and everything else is real, but not fundamental? What if it is real in the same way that a wave is real, genuinely present, genuinely observable, genuinely having effects in the world, and yet not, at a deeper level, a separate thing? A wave is the ocean waving. The wave is not separate from the ocean. The wave does not need to negotiate with the ocean or survive against the ocean. The wave is a movement of the ocean, a shape the ocean takes, a particular expression of the ocean's energy. And when the wave subsides, it does not die. It simply returns to being what it always was, which is the ocean. What if you are like that? What if you are the universe waving? What if this self, this particular configuration of matter and energy and awareness, this thing you call I, is the universe doing what it does when it expresses itself in the form of a human being? And what if the feeling of separation, the feeling of being enclosed and isolated and alone inside your skin, is not the truth of your situation, but rather a kind of necessary fiction, a kind of useful illusion that allows the universe to have this particular kind of experience, the experience of being a creature that peers out at the world from behind two eyes and wonders what everything means? Most people never question this. Most people accept the story of the separate self so completely, so automatically, that the possibility of questioning it never even arises. And this is not because they are unintelligent. It is because the story is very good. It is very convincing. It is woven into every aspect of how we are taught to think and speak and relate. Every sentence we construct in English requires a subject. Every sentence requires a self. I think, I feel, I want, I am. The very grammar of our language encodes the assumption of separation, encodes the subject-object division, encodes the idea that there is an I that is separate from the world it perceives. And because language shapes thought, and because we think almost constantly in language, we are perpetually reinforcing the illusion without ever noticing that we are doing it. But here is the strange part. Language itself points beyond itself, if you listen carefully enough. The word I, the simplest, shortest, most used word in the English language, when you actually try to find what it refers to, when you turn your attention inward and ask, where exactly is this self that I keep saying I? The answer is surprisingly elusive. You find thoughts, you find sensations, you find memories, you find emotions. You find a continuous stream of mental events flowing past like a river. But the I itself, the observer, the one who is doing the observing, where is that? Every time you try to look at it directly, it seems to slip sideways. It is always the subject, never quite the object. You cannot see the I with the eye. You cannot catch the mind with the mind. And this slipping, this elusiveness, this inability to pin down the self that you are always claiming to be, this is not a sign of your confusion. This is a clue. This is a very important clue about the nature of what you actually are.
The philosopher David Hume noticed this in the 18th century. He looked inward, carefully and honestly, and reported that he could find no self, only a bundle of perceptions, a stream of experiences, each one arising and passing away. He called it a bundle theory of the self, and it troubled him greatly, because it seemed to undermine the foundations of human identity and morality. But perhaps he was looking for the wrong thing.
Perhaps the absence of a fixed, solid, findable self is not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be celebrated. Perhaps the fluidity, the elusiveness, the unbounded quality of what you actually are when you look closely. Perhaps that is not a deficiency, but the very thing that allows you to be as alive, as aware, as responsive to reality as you are. Because consider what the alternative would look like. If you were a truly fixed, solid, separate self, if you were genuinely enclosed, genuinely isolated, genuinely other than the world, what would experience even mean? How would you perceive anything? To perceive is to be affected. To be affected is to be changed. Every act of perception involves an exchange between what is inside and what is outside, a flowing back and forth of information and energy. You cannot genuinely see something without being changed by it, even slightly. You cannot genuinely hear something without it entering you. Consciousness is not a sealed room that peers out at the world through a small window. Consciousness is the opening itself. It is the place where the inside and the outside meet and interpenetrate and become, if only for a moment, undivided. And this is where we arrive at one of the most astonishing facts about reality, a fact so obvious, so always already true, that it is almost always overlooked. The fact of consciousness itself. The fact that there is something it is like to be you. The fact of experience. The fact that the universe, in the form of you, is not merely a configuration of matter following mechanical laws, but a configuration of matter that knows it exists, that feels the warmth of the sun, that hears music and is moved by it, that looks up at the night sky and is struck by something that has no adequate name. Something like awe, something like recognition, something like the feeling of returning to a place you have always known, but somehow forgot you knew. Science is extraordinarily good at explaining many things. It is extraordinarily good at describing the mechanisms by which the world works, the structures of matter and energy, the processes of life and evolution and cosmology. But consciousness, actual, subjective, felt experience, remains, even for the most sophisticated science, deeply mysterious. Philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness, this gap between the neural activity in the brain and the felt quality of experience. How does the firing of neurons give rise to the redness of red? How does electrochemical activity in organic tissue give rise to the feeling of sorrow, or the taste of an apple, or the particular quality of silence in a forest after snow? This is not a problem that is about to be solved by a better brain scanner. It is a problem that points to something fundamental about the nature of reality, something that our current categories of thinking may not be equipped to address. And here is what is interesting. The ancient philosophical and contemplative traditions of the world, the traditions of India and China and Japan, and the indigenous peoples of every continent, these traditions were not ignorant of this problem. In fact, in many ways, they were more sophisticated about it than modern science, not because they had better instruments, but because they had better questions. They were asking questions not about how the world is organized from the outside, but about what the world is like from the inside. They were asking questions about the nature of consciousness itself, about the relationship between awareness and the objects of awareness, about the possibility that mind and world are not two separate things that somehow interact, but one thing that appears as two from a certain angle. In the traditions of India, particularly in the non-dual philosophies of Advaita Vedanta, there is a concept called Brahman, the ultimate reality, the ground of being, the one thing of which everything is made.
And there is a concept called Atman, the innermost self, the pure awareness at the core of each individual being. And the revolutionary claim of Advaita Vedanta, the claim that the sage Shankara elaborated with extraordinary philosophical rigor in the 8th century, and that the Upanishads have been pointing toward for thousands of years before him, is that Brahman and Atman are not two different things. Tat tvam asi, that thou art. The ultimate reality of the universe and the innermost reality of you are the same reality, appearing in two different forms. The wave is the ocean. The individual is the universal. Now, this is easy to say. It is easy to hear. And immediately after hearing it, most people feel that they understand it. They nod. They think, yes, that makes sense. We are all connected. Everything is one. I get that. And then they go back to feeling like a separate self, surrounded by a world that is other. Because understanding this conceptually and actually experiencing it as the living truth of your existence are completely different things. The concept is a finger pointing at the moon. And, as the Zen tradition says, when a finger points at the moon, the fool looks at the finger. So how do you actually experience this, rather than just thinking about it? How do you get from the concept to the reality? This is the question that every genuine spiritual tradition in the world has been wrestling with for as long as human beings have been capable of asking it.
And there are many answers, or many pointers toward answers. Meditation, contemplation, prayer, music, art, the practice of paying close attention to ordinary experience, certain kinds of psychedelic experience, certain moments of extreme beauty or extreme grief that strip away the ordinary habits of mind and leave you open in a way that everyday life rarely allows. But here is what I want to suggest. Here is what I think is most important to understand before any of those practices can really work. The obstacle is not a lack of knowledge. The obstacle is not a lack of the right technique. The obstacle is something much simpler and much more subtle. The obstacle is the belief that there is something to achieve, something to get, somewhere to arrive. The belief that the experience of unity, of non-separation, of being fully alive in the present moment, the belief that this is something other than what you already are, something you need to work toward, something located in the future, something that will be delivered to you as a reward for sufficient effort and goodness. Because if reality is truly what the non-dual traditions say it is, if there is only this one reality expressing itself in countless forms, if the universe and consciousness are not separate things, then what you are looking for cannot be somewhere else. It can only be here. It can only be now. It can only be what is already the case. And the seeking, the frantic, anxious, always just around the corner seeking, is itself the thing that is getting in the way. It is like trying to find your eyes by looking. It is like trying to hear your own ears. It is like trying to catch the present moment, which is always already here before you arrive. This is why Alan Watts said that the present moment is the only thing that was never not here. Everything else, every person, every object, every thought, every feeling, every civilization, every planet, every star, everything else has had a beginning and will have an end. But the present moment, the sheer fact of now, has always been here and will always be here. It is the one constant in all of reality, and it is the one thing we are most consistently, most compulsively, most expertly avoiding. Think about how much of your mental life is spent not in the present moment. Think about how much time your mind spends rehearsing conversations that have not happened, replaying conversations that have, worrying about futures that may never arrive, mourning pasts that cannot be changed, planning and scheming and strategizing and calculating. Think about how rarely you are simply here, simply present, simply available to the actual texture of experience as it is happening. The sounds around you, the sensations in your body, the quality of the light, the feeling of the air, the fact of being alive right now, in this moment, which is real in a way that no past or future moment ever can be,
because only this moment is actually happening. We have been trained, by school, by work, by the whole structure of modern life, to live in the future and the past, to defer the present, to treat the present as a means to a future end rather than an end in itself. Everything we do is preparation. Childhood is preparation for adulthood. School is preparation for work. Work is preparation for retirement. And retirement is, often as not, preparation for death, a slow winding down, a diminishment, a final chapter in which life is reviewed rather than lived. And at some point, usually too late, the thought occurs, when was I actually here? When was I actually present? When did I actually inhabit my own life, rather than always preparing for it, always waiting for it to begin? This is not an indictment. This is an observation.
And it is an observation with compassion, because the structure that trains us to live this way is not malicious. It is the accumulated result of human ingenuity applied to the problem of survival. And for most of human history, survival required this kind of forward thinking, this kind of planning and preparation. The person who only ever lived in the present, who never thought ahead, who never planned for winter or prepared for drought, that person did not survive. And so we evolved, and we built cultures that prized the capacity to delay gratification, to sacrifice the present for the future, to live always with one eye on what is coming next. But we took this adaptive capacity and we ran it beyond its useful range. We took a tool that was appropriate in certain contexts and made it the foundation of our entire relationship with time and experience. We became so good at being somewhere else, at being some when else, that we forgot how to be here at all. And in forgetting how to be here, we lost something that cannot be recovered by any amount of future planning or past analysis. We lost the actual experience of being alive. Here is the strange part. The present moment is not the enemy of planning and reflection. Genuine presence does not require that you abandon memory or stop thinking about the future. It simply requires that your relationship with those mental activities changes, that they become tools you use rather than trances you fall into. When you are genuinely present, you can think about the future without being transported into it. You can remember the past without being held captive by it. The difference is not in the content of thought, but in the quality of awareness that contains thought. And that quality of awareness, clear, open, spacious, responsive, is what the contemplative traditions of the world have always been pointing toward. But here we arrive at another layer of the story, because even when people intellectually accept all of this, even when they can nod along and say, yes, I understand about presence, yes, I understand about non-separation, yes, I get that the self is not what I thought it was. Even then, something holds back. Even then, something in the depths refuses to really let go. And that something has a name. That something is the ego. The word ego comes from the Latin word for I, and in the psychological tradition, particularly in the work of Sigmund Freud, the ego is a technical term for the part of the mind that mediates between inner desires and outer reality. But in the broader sense in which I am using it here, and in the sense in which the contemplative traditions use it, ego refers to something subtler. It refers to the story of self. It refers to the narrative that the mind constructs and then identifies with. It refers to the sense of being a character in a story, a character with a history and a personality, and a future to protect and a reputation to maintain, and a certain way of being in the world that must be defended against challenge and change. The ego is not bad. This bears repeating, because the moment you use the word ego in a spiritual context, people often immediately hear it as an accusation, as something to be eliminated, as the enemy. And this is a mistake. The ego is an extraordinary achievement. It is the result of millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of cultural development. The capacity to form a stable self-concept, to maintain a consistent identity across time, to recognize yourself in a mirror, to plan and to remember, to feel continuity with the person you were yesterday and the person you will be tomorrow.
This is genuinely astonishing. Most creatures on Earth cannot do it. The ego is a remarkable tool. The problem is not the ego itself. The problem is identification with the ego. The problem is when the tool becomes the master.
The problem is when the story about yourself becomes so compelling, so all-encompassing, so taken for granted as reality, that you forget it is a story. The problem is when you become so absorbed in the character that you forget you are also the author, that you forget there is awareness behind the story, awareness that is not itself a character, awareness that is the space in which all characters and all stories arise and play out and dissolve. This is the illusion of separation at its deepest level. Not just the sense of being separate from the world outside your skin, but the more subtle sense of being separate from the deeper layers of your own being. The ego is separate from the unconscious. The thinking mind is separate from the body. The deliberate, controlled, rational self is separate from the dreaming, feeling, instinctual, wild self that bubbles up from depths it cannot see or control. And this internal separation, this war within the self, is as painful, perhaps more painful, than the external separation between self and world. Because the ego does not like what it cannot control. The ego does not like the body's vulnerability, its sickness, its aging, its eventual death. The ego does not like the unconscious, with its strange dreams and irrational impulses and emotions that arrive without permission. The ego does not like silence, because in silence, the story stops. And if the story stops, then where is the ego? What is left? And what might arise in the absence of the story that the ego cannot predict or manage? This is why people are so extraordinarily uncomfortable with silence. Not just the absence of external sound, but the internal silence, the cessation of the inner monologue, the stopping of the constant commentary and planning and remembering and imagining. Most people, when they encounter genuine inner silence, find it immediately uncomfortable. They reach for a phone. They turn on the television. They start a conversation. They find something to think about, anything to fill the space, because the space itself is threatening. And this is fascinating if you really sit with it. What is threatening about silence? What is threatening about the absence of mental content? Logically, nothing. Silence is just silence. Emptiness is just emptiness. But the ego experiences it as a kind of death, because the ego is constituted by content. The ego is made of thoughts and memories and stories and plans. Take all of that away, and the ego cannot find itself. Take all of that away, and you are left with what exactly? With awareness itself. With consciousness without content. With the simple, open, luminous fact of being aware, without anything in particular being aware of. And here is the extraordinary thing that the contemplative traditions unanimously point to. That bare awareness, that contentless consciousness, that simple being present, far from being threatening, far from being an absence of something good, is in fact the most alive, most real, most complete thing you can experience. It is not emptiness in the sense of lack. It is fullness. It is what the Zen tradition calls satori, what the Hindu tradition calls samadhi, what the Christian mystical tradition calls the cloud of unknowing, what the Taoist tradition calls wu-wei, the effortless action, the action that is no action, the being that requires no doing. It goes by many names in many traditions, but it points to the same thing, the thing that is always already here, before thought, beneath thought, the ground of all experience that is itself unexperienced because it is the experiencer. Most people never realize this. Most people spend their lives doing and striving and achieving and accumulating, and now and then in some unexpected moment, lying in the grass looking up at clouds, or waking in the small hours of the morning,
before thought has resumed its familiar patterns, or in the middle of music that has somehow bypassed the guard of the thinking mind. In those unexpected moments, something opens. Something that was always there is briefly visible. And it is so simple, so obvious, so completely without drama, that the mind almost immediately dismisses it. That cannot be it. It is too simple, too ordinary, too quiet. There is nothing here to achieve, nothing to hold on to, nothing impressive to report. And so the mind turns away and goes back to its business, carrying the vague and uneasy sense that something important just happened, and it failed to grasp what it was. And this repeated missing, this habitual turning away from the most immediate and obvious thing, which is the bare fact of being aware, is the fundamental mistake at the heart of human suffering. Not a moral failure, not a character flaw, just a case of looking in the wrong direction, always looking outward when the most important thing is right here, in the looking itself. Always looking forward or backward in time, when the only real thing is the present. Always looking for something more, something better, something other than this, when this, right now, this simple being here, is already the whole thing. Now, I am aware that this might sound like it is recommending a kind of passive withdrawal from life, a kind of lotus-eating quietism, in which nothing matters and nothing needs to be done, and you just sit there in blissful non-doing while the world falls apart around you. This is a common misunderstanding, and it is worth addressing directly.
Because the insight I am pointing toward, the insight that the self is not separate from the world, that consciousness is not enclosed but open, that the present moment is the only actual reality, this insight does not lead to withdrawal, it leads to the opposite of withdrawal. When you are not constantly defending a separate self, when you are not spending enormous amounts of energy maintaining the boundaries of the ego, when you stop fighting reality and start actually inhabiting it, what you find is not withdrawal but engagement, deeper engagement, more genuine engagement, more responsive engagement, the kind of engagement that arises not from compulsion and fear, but from something more like love, from the recognition that what you are doing things to, what you are in relationship with, is not other, is not foreign, is not the enemy, is you in another form. This is the foundation of what the contemplative traditions call compassion, not pity, not the slightly superior concern of someone who has their life together, looking down at someone who does not, but genuine compassion, the recognition of shared being, the felt sense of connection, the understanding that the suffering of another is not separate from your suffering, that the joy of another is not separate from your joy, that we are all expressions of the same life, the same awareness, the same whatever it is that is the ground of everything. But here is the strange part, and this is a part that makes many people uncomfortable. True compassion, genuine, non-separated awareness, does not require that you pretend everything is fine when it is not. It does not require that you paste a smile over genuine pain, or genuine anger, or genuine grief. In fact, quite the opposite. It requires the most unflinching honesty about the full range of what is happening in yourself, in others, in the world. Because when you are not defending a self, you do not need to manage your experience. You do not need to keep the difficult things at bay. You can allow everything, the joy and the sorrow, the beauty and the horror, the love and the grief. You can allow everything to move through you, because there is no enclosed container to be overwhelmed. The wave passes through the ocean. The ocean is not diminished. This is what the great contemplative traditions mean when they speak of equanimity. Not the equanimity of someone who does not care, who is indifferent, who has numbed themselves to the world's suffering, but the equanimity of the ocean itself, the capacity to be moved by everything, to feel everything, to respond to everything, without being capsized. The stability that comes not from rigidity, but from depth. Not the steadiness of the wall that resists every wind,
but the steadiness of the deep water that allows the surface to be as wild as it needs to be, while remaining, at its depths, perfectly still. Let us talk about death, because we cannot talk about reality without talking about death. And yet it is one of the things that culture, particularly modern Western culture, works the hardest to avoid talking about. We tuck it away. We keep it behind closed doors. We deal with it quickly and efficiently, and then return to normal life as fast as possible. Because to linger with death is too uncomfortable, too frightening, too much a reminder of the thing that the ego is most afraid of. The ego is afraid of death because the ego is afraid of the end of the story that the ego tells about itself, the story with a protagonist, with a history, with a future to be secured. That story requires continuity. It requires that there be a tomorrow in which the character still exists, still accumulates, still becomes. And death is the end of that. Death is the stop. Death is the period at the end of the sentence. And to the ego, which has identified itself with the sentence, that period is catastrophic.
But what if the sentence is not what you are? What if you are the page on which the sentence is written? What if you are the silence out of which the words arise and into which they return? Then the period at the end of the sentence is not catastrophic. It is simply the end of a sentence. And sentences end. They always end. And what continues is the page, the silence, the awareness that was never the content, but always the context. This is what every mystical tradition means when it speaks of eternal life, not the continuation of the personal story, not the survival of the ego, not a heavenly afterlife in which you get to continue being you, only better, only happier, only finally free from the things that troubled you here. The eternal life that the mystical traditions point toward is the recognition, here and now, that what you fundamentally are is not the story, but the awareness, and awareness is not born and does not die. Awareness is not a thing that begins and ends. Awareness is the space in which beginnings and endings occur. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not claiming to know what happens after death. Nobody knows. Anyone who tells you with certainty what happens after death is selling something. The honest position is not knowing. And not knowing, genuinely not knowing, is not a comfortable place for the ego. The ego wants certainty. The ego wants guarantees. The ego wants to know that it will survive, that it will continue, that the story will go on. And in the absence of those guarantees, the ego generates fear. Chronic, low-level, often unconscious fear. The fear that colors every aspect of life, that drives the compulsive accumulation and achievement, that makes the present moment so hard to inhabit, because the present moment always, if you stay in it long enough, touches the edge of its own ending. But here is what I think is important. The fear of death is, at its deepest level, not about death. It is about the loss of self. And if the self that you think you are, the ego, the story, the personal narrative, if that self is already, right now, not quite what you thought it was, then the fear changes character. Not because you have proven that you will survive death, but because the thing that fears death has become less solid, less fixed, less absolutely real. The fear is still there, perhaps, but it floats more freely. It is less gripping. It does not have the same weight, because the weight was given to it by the absolute identification with the self, and that absolute identification has begun to soften. This is what meditation does, if it does anything. Not floats you away to some blissful realm above ordinary life, but slowly, gradually, incrementally softens the edges of the identification, makes the self a little more transparent, makes the story a little more obviously a story, makes the space around the thoughts a little more obviously spacious. Not through any dramatic revelation, though those happen too and they are important, but through the simple, repeated, patient practice of sitting with your own experience without running from it,
without adding to it, without changing it. Just sitting, just being, just noticing. And what you gradually notice through this practice is something remarkable. You notice that the thoughts are not you. You notice that thoughts arise, and they move through awareness like clouds move through sky, and they dissolve, and the sky remains. You notice that emotions are not you. Emotions arise, sometimes enormous, sometimes overwhelming, and they move through awareness like weather moves through the atmosphere, and they pass, and the atmosphere remains. You notice that sensations are not you. Pain arises, pleasure arises, the body registers its condition in whatever way it does, and these registrations move through awareness, and they pass, and awareness remains.
And gradually, not all at once, but gradually, the question shifts. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" meaning, what is the content, what are the characteristics, what is the story, you begin to ask, what is this awareness itself? What is this space in which everything arises? What is this that remains when everything else passes? And the extraordinary thing, the thing that I want to say very carefully because it is very easy to misunderstand, the extraordinary thing is that this question cannot be answered by thinking about it. It can only be answered by attending to it directly. And when you attend to it directly, what you find is not a thing. What you find is not an object, not a concept, not a describable entity. What you find is pure openness, pure transparency. The awareness that is aware of itself is not a thing being aware of itself. It is more like a clearing, a space, a field of availability. And in that field, everything arises and passes, and the field itself is untouched, undiminished, completely at rest, even in the midst of the greatest turbulence. This is what the Zen teacher means when he says, your original face before your parents were born. Not a face in the literal sense, but the original you. The you before the story, before the name, before the history, before the ego construction, before the conceptual overlay. The bare fact of being aware, which was here before your birth, in the sense that it is the same awareness that was here before your birth, the same light that has always lit every experience that has ever occurred. And this is where everything changes. Because when you begin to glimpse this, when even a little of this becomes your actual experience rather than a concept you are holding, the whole quality of life changes. Not because your circumstances change, not because you suddenly have better luck, or more money, or more love, or fewer problems. The problems remain. The difficulties of life remain. The fact of mortality remains. Everything that was there before is still there, but your relationship to it all has shifted. And the shift, though it is only in relationship and not in content, makes all the difference. Think of it this way. The difference between a person who is terrified of water and a person who is a skilled swimmer. The water is the same. The ocean is the same. The waves are the same. But the person who knows how to swim is not fighting the water. They are using it. They are in relationship with it rather than in opposition to it. They can go places the terrified person cannot go. They can see things the terrified person cannot see. And the beauty of the ocean, which the terrified person cannot appreciate because they are too busy trying not to drown, that beauty is available to the swimmer in a way that transforms the experience of being in the water from terror to joy. The difference that the shift in awareness makes is something like that. Not that the water changes, but that your relationship to the water changes. Not that life becomes free from difficulty, but that you stop fighting the difficulty in the way that a person who cannot swim fights the water. Not that death disappears, but
but that you stop drowning in the fear of it. Life becomes navigable in a way it was not before, and more than navigable, alive, more fully, vividly, irreducibly alive than the defended, contracted, always managing life of the ego can ever be. But here is something important. This shift does not happen by deciding to shift. This shift does not happen by trying harder. This shift cannot be forced. And this is one of the most frustrating things about the whole territory, because we are trained to approach every problem as something to be solved through effort, through will, through the application of intelligence and determination.
And we bring all of that to the problem of our own liberation from the prison of the ego. And it does not work. And we cannot understand why. And so we try harder. And it still does not work. And the frustration mounts. And the ego is, paradoxically, fortified by the very effort to transcend it. Because the effort is itself an ego project. The ego trying to become enlightened. The ego trying to achieve non-ego, which is as impossible as trying to bite your own teeth. The insight that cuts through this paradox, the insight that is at the heart of Zen, of Taoism, of the most direct teachings of Advaita Vedanta, is the insight that there is nothing to achieve. Not as a consolation, not as an excuse for passivity, but as a literal description of the situation. What you are looking for is what is looking. The awareness you are seeking to uncover is the awareness doing the seeking. The peace you are trying to reach is the peace that is already here, in the pause between one thought and the next, in the space around the sounds, in the simple, ordinary, utterly unremarkable fact of being present and aware in this moment. What you pay attention to is, in a very real sense, your reality. Not because external reality does not exist, but because experience, which is the only reality you ever actually have direct access to, is always filtered, shaped, and constructed by attention. Two people can be in the same room having completely different experiences, not because the room is different for them, but because their attention is directed differently, and so different aspects of the room's reality are alive for them. The person who has been trained by years of musical education hears a piece of music differently from someone without that training. Not better necessarily, though sometimes better, but differently. With different aspects foregrounded, different patterns recognized, different emotional and intellectual responses available. The person who has spent years in contemplative practice experiences a moment of silence differently from someone who has never done that. The person who has genuinely encountered their own mortality, through illness, through the death of someone close, through some crisis that stripped away the comfortable assumption of indefinite time. That person is present to life in a way that others often are not. These differences are not accidental. They are the result of attention being trained, cultivated, directed in certain ways over time. Which means that what you are able to experience, the full range of what reality can deliver, is not fixed. It is not given. It grows with the cultivation of attention. And the cultivation of attention is the deepest and most important form of education available to a human being. Deeper than the cultivation of knowledge, deeper than the cultivation of skills, because it is the foundation from which all knowledge and all skill derive their value. An extraordinary amount of knowledge in a mind that is not present, that is not capable of genuine attention, that is always elsewhere. That knowledge does very little. It becomes trivia. It becomes a performance. It becomes the kind of thing you can recite but not use, describe but not feel, know about but never actually be. Whereas a person with modest knowledge and genuine attention, a person who is actually, truly here when they are here, that person is capable of richness of experience, depth of relationship, genuine creativity, genuine responsiveness, genuine wisdom, in ways that the knowledgeable but unattentive person simply cannot access.
This is why Thoreau went to Walden Pond, not because the pond was special, not because nature is inherently more real than civilization, but because he recognized that the noise and busyness of the society he lived in was making genuine attention impossible, and that without genuine attention, life, however full of events and accomplishments, would amount to what he called quiet desperation. He went to Walden to practice attention, to slow down enough to actually see what was in front of him, to make contact with the actual texture of experience, rather than sailing over it on a raft of habit and distraction. And what he found there, in the 2 years and 2 months he spent at the pond, was not the absence of richness, but its multiplication. Not the absence of event, but the deepening of it. Every day at the pond contained, for Thoreau, more genuine experience than a year of ordinary life in Concord. Not because more things happened, but because more was actually seen, actually heard, actually felt. The world did not become bigger, his attention did. And as his attention grew, the world, for him, became inexhaustible. This is what the poet William Blake meant when he wrote of seeing a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. Not a metaphor for large-scale experience compressed into small scale, not a claim that grains of sand are secretly important, a direct description of what is actually available in ordinary perception, when ordinary perception is cleared of its habitual filtering and narrowing. The grain of sand is actually a world of physical and chemical complexity, a world of geological history, a world of light and form, a world of relationship to every other thing in the universe. It is all there. It is all actually there. But only for the eye that has been trained, or somehow liberated, to see it. And I think this is perhaps the most practical thing that I can say in this entire conversation. Whatever else you take away from these ideas, this is actionable.
This is something you can do, or rather something you can stop doing, or rather something you can allow to happen, in ordinary life without any special conditions or preparations or practices. You can slow down, just a little, not dramatically, not a retreat from life, but enough to actually be present to what is happening, enough to feel the chair beneath you, the temperature of the air, the sounds of wherever you are, enough to look at the person you are with your actual eyes, rather than your assumptions about them, enough to taste your food rather than simply consuming it while your attention is somewhere else, enough to notice that the sky is doing whatever the sky is doing today, and that this particular sky, on this particular day, will never come again. Because impermanence cuts both ways. It is the source of the ego's terror. Everything will change, everything will end, and this is unbearable. But it is also the source of the present moment's extraordinary value. This conversation, right now, it is happening once. This configuration of awareness, these thoughts, this listening, it will never repeat. It is unrepeatable, absolutely and completely unrepeatable. And in that unrepeatable quality, there is something precious, something that demands to be noticed, something that does not want to be missed. The Buddhist teacher Shunryu Suzuki said that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. This is another way of saying what Blake was saying. The expert sees what their expertise prepares them to see. Their categories are already formed. Their responses are already organized. They are efficient. They are effective. But they are no longer, in the deepest sense, surprised. And to lose the capacity for genuine surprise, the capacity to actually encounter reality rather than recognize it, to see rather than just identify, that is a great loss. That is perhaps the greatest loss. The practice that all the contemplative traditions recommend, in their different ways, is the practice of beginner's mind. the practice of approaching experience as if for the first time. Not the performance of naivete, not the pretending that you do not know what you know, but the genuine cultivation of openness, the openness that allows what is actually present to land, rather than being immediately subsumed into the familiar categories, and therefore, in a sense, not quite encountered at all. This is a practice. It requires repeated, patient, consistent returning. Because the pull toward the familiar, the pull toward the habitual, the pull toward seeing what you expect to see, that pull is very strong. It is the result of millions of years of evolutionary wiring. The brain is an extraordinary prediction machine, constantly building models of the world, constantly testing its predictions, constantly looking for patterns and regularities that allow it to process the incoming flood of sensory information efficiently, without having to process everything from scratch every moment. This is a magnificent capacity. Without it, you would be overwhelmed. You could not function. But it comes at a cost. The cost is that most of what you experience, you do not actually experience directly. You experience your brain's model of it. You experience the prediction, the category, the label, and the actual, direct, immediate reality, the thing itself, in all its strangeness and particularity and richness, that is always slightly beyond the reach of the model, always slightly more than the category can capture, always, at its ground, a mystery. And this mystery is not a deficit. This mystery is not a problem. This mystery is the very texture of reality as it presents itself to genuine attention. This mystery is what the artist is trying to express when art is at its most honest. This mystery is what the mystic is trying to point at when mysticism is at its most precise. This mystery is not the mystery of the unknown in the sense of the not yet figured out. It is the mystery of the inexhaustible, the mystery of the always exceeding, the mystery of the thing that is always more than any description of it could capture. A recognition of what? Of being at home, of belonging here, of being not a stranger in a strange universe, but an expression of the universe in which there is nothing foreign, nothing external, nothing that is not, at the deepest level, the same life that you are. A recognition that the light by which you see the world is the same light as the world itself. That consciousness and reality are not two things meeting, but one thing recognizing itself. That you are not in the universe as a fish is in water, but as a wave is in the ocean, constituted by it, expressive of it, inseparable from it, never for a moment actually separate from the thing that you appear to be moving through. And when this recognition lands, even slightly, even briefly, even imperfectly, which is the only way it ever lands, what you feel is not excitement. Excitement is the ego's response to something new. What you feel is something older and quieter and more fundamental than excitement. What you feel is rest. The rest of having been somewhere very far away for a very long time, and finally, returning to the place you were always already at. The rest of having carried a weight whose name you never quite knew, and setting it down, and finding your body remembering how it feels to be without it. The rest of the journey's end, which is not a place, but a recognition. The recognition that the journey was always happening here, and the home you were looking for was always here, and you were always home, even in your wandering, even in your searching, even in the long and beautiful and difficult middle of not quite knowing what you were. The truth about reality that nobody talks about is this: it is not hidden, it is not elsewhere, it is not reserved for the spiritually advanced or the philosophically trained or the religiously devoted. It is here, it is now, it is the very ground of this moment. It is what you are reading with and what you are reading about,
and the space in which the reading is occurring. It is so close that you cannot see it, the way you cannot see your own face without a mirror. But you are it. You are it in the same way that the wave is the ocean, in the same way that the word love points toward the thing that defies all pointing. This is the truth that nobody talks about, not because it is secret, but because it is so obvious that it is almost invisible. Not because it is difficult, but because it is too simple. Not because it is far away, but because it is too close. It is the awareness reading these words. It is the silence between these words. It is the fact that you are here, right now, in this moment, which is the only moment that is real, which is the only moment that has ever been real, which is the moment that was here before your birth, and will be here after your death, and is here now, as it always has been, and always will be, wide open, inexhaustible, at rest, alive, complete. Welcome home, and take good care of the mystery. It is your own. But before we arrive fully at that home, there is more to explore, because the journey through these ideas is itself a part of the practice. The sustained sitting with these questions, the willingness to keep looking rather than settling for the first comfortable answer, the patience required to let something real emerge from the space between thoughts, rather than grabbing at the nearest concept and calling it understanding. All of that is the work. Or rather, all of that is the not quite work, the not quite effort, the thing that the Taoists would recognize as something between doing and not doing.
So let us keep going. Let us go further into the question of consciousness, because I think we have barely touched its surface. And the surface is interesting, but the depths are where everything changes. Consciousness is, without exaggeration, the most mysterious thing in the known universe. And by known universe, I mean exactly that, the universe as it is known. Because knowing is the first requirement. Before there is a universe in any meaningful sense, before there is a fact of the matter about anything, there must be knowing. There must be experience. There must be something it is like to be here. Take away all knowing, all experience, all consciousness, and what you have is not a universe waiting to be experienced. You have nothing. Or you have something, but something without any witness, without any interiority, without any inside, and therefore something that, in the most fundamental sense, might as well be nothing. This is a strange thought, and it tends to make people uncomfortable. It sounds like idealism, like the philosophical position that says the world exists only in the mind, that reality is mental all the way down. And that is not quite what I am saying, though the great idealist philosophers, Berkeley, Hegel, Schopenhauer, were pointing at something real and important, something that the purely materialist position misses. What I am saying is something more careful than idealism, and more radical than materialism. I am saying that consciousness is not a product of matter that can be explained away. I am saying that the relationship between mind and world is not the relationship between a small bubble of subjectivity floating inside a vast, indifferent, purely physical universe. I am saying that the dichotomy itself, the dichotomy between mind and world, between subjective and objective, between inside and outside, is a conceptual convenience that does not accurately describe what reality actually is. The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who spent much of his intellectual life trying to describe a reality that was more adequate to the actual facts of experience than either traditional materialism or traditional idealism, proposed that experience is not something that happens inside organisms and nowhere else. He proposed that some form of experience, some form of interiority, some analog of feeling and response, is a feature of reality all the way down. Not that rocks have thoughts, not that atoms have feelings in the sense that you have feelings,
but that the dichotomy between experiencing things and non-experiencing things is not as clean as we tend to assume, and that the emergence of rich subjective experience in creatures like us might be less of a mysterious exception to an otherwise mindless universe, and more of a flowering of something that was always already implicit in the nature of things. This view is called panpsychism or panexperientialism, and it is having a remarkable renaissance in contemporary philosophy of mind. Not because it solves all the problems, it creates some interesting new ones, but because it takes seriously the reality of experience in a way that purely materialist theories do not, and because it points toward a picture of reality in which consciousness is not an anomaly, but an expression of something fundamental. And this matters for our purposes, not because we need to adopt a particular philosophical position about the metaphysics of consciousness, but because it suggests something important about your relationship to reality.
If experience is not a bubble of subjectivity inside an otherwise unconscious universe, but is in some sense continuous with the nature of reality itself, then the experience of opening toward reality, of feeling reality touching you and being touched in return, of the interpenetration of self and world that the mystics describe, this is not a subjective impression with no external correlate. It is a genuine meeting, a genuine contact, a genuine encounter between two modes of the same underlying reality. And when you feel that, when you feel the world not as an external object being perceived from behind the glass of your subjectivity, but as something you are continuous with, something you are in, something you are made of and making, when you feel that, even briefly, even partially, you are not having a delusion. You are, arguably, for the first time, actually accurately perceiving your situation. Dependent on the dreamer for their existence. I do not want to build too much on this metaphysical speculation. What I want to point toward is something simpler and more experiential. The thing I want to point toward is this: the relationship you have with time can change. The sense of being swept along by time, of being hurried, of never having enough of it, of being late or behind or already past your best. This sense is not an accurate description of your actual relationship with time. It is a particular relationship, generated by a particular quality of attention, and it can be changed, not by managing your schedule better, not by productivity techniques, not by doing more in less time, but by the shift of awareness that allows you to actually inhabit the present moment, rather than perpetually trying to escape it toward a more convenient moment that is always just ahead. When you are genuinely present, time does not disappear, but your struggle with it does. You are no longer running from the present moment toward the next one. You are no longer treating this moment as a means to the next moment. You are here, and here is where life is, and life in the present moment, actual, immediate, embodied, sensory, fully experienced life, does not feel scarce. It does not feel rushed. It does not feel like it is slipping away. It feels, quite simply, like enough, more than enough, like the fullness of the wave, which is at every moment completely itself, not straining toward some future configuration of itself that will finally be adequate. Now let me say something about beauty, because beauty is not a luxury, not an aesthetic preference, not something that belongs only in museums and concert halls. Beauty is a way of perceiving reality, and it is one of the most direct routes to the kind of presence I have been describing. Beauty stops you. Beauty interrupts the automatic running of the mind. Beauty says, stop, and actually look at this. And when you stop and actually look, what you find is always, in some measure, a revelation. Not a comfortable revelation. Sometimes beauty is painful, in exactly the way that all genuine contact with reality is painful, because contact means openness, and openness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means that you are actually here, actually affected, actually alive,
in the way that only genuine presence allows. The philosopher Iris Murdoch, in her remarkable book, The Sovereignty of Good, argued that the experience of beauty is morally significant because it requires a temporary silencing of the self. When you genuinely encounter something beautiful, a piece of music, a landscape, a face, a mathematical proof, your attention is for that moment not on yourself, not on your plans, your worries, your self-concept, your image. For that moment, your attention is genuinely directed outward, genuinely engaged with what is other, genuinely, for a moment, outside the prison of the ego.
And Murdoch argued that this capacity for unselfed attention, attention that is not in service of the ego's projects, but is genuinely interested in what is there, is the same capacity that underlies genuine moral goodness. The capacity to see others as they actually are, rather than as your fears and desires and projections make them appear. The capacity for genuine compassion, which requires, first of all, actually seeing the person you are being compassionate toward. This is a profound observation, and it connects to something that I think is one of the most important practical implications of everything we have been discussing. The cultivation of aesthetic sensitivity, the training of yourself to genuinely see, genuinely hear, genuinely taste and smell and feel, is not a hobby. It is not a leisure activity that you pursue when the important work is done. It is itself the important work. It is the practice of genuine attention, which is the practice of genuine presence, which is the practice of the kind of relationship with reality that makes genuine wisdom, genuine compassion, and genuine joy possible. Think about what happens when you really listen to music. Not when music is playing in the background while you do something else, but when you genuinely listen, when you give the music your full attention, when you let it in, when you follow it, when you allow yourself to be moved by it. What is that experience? It is a temporary dissolution of the boundary between inside and outside. The music does not stay outside you and enter through your ears as a neutral signal. It moves through you. It moves things in you. It organizes your feeling, your attention, your sense of time in ways that your ordinary self did not choose and could not have predicted. You are, for the duration of genuine listening, not the self that sits at the center of its own story. You are, for that duration, a channel through which the music flows. This is why music has been so important to human beings across every culture and every historical period. Not because it is pleasant, though it often is, but because it is one of the most readily available routes to the kind of openness, the kind of self-transcendence, the kind of genuine presence that is otherwise very difficult to access in ordinary life. Music does what meditation does, what prayer does, what profound love does. It temporarily softens the boundaries of the self and allows the world to enter more completely than the defended ego normally permits. And what is true of music is true, to varying degrees, of all genuine art. Genuine art. Not art as decoration, not art as entertainment, but art as the product of genuine vision, genuine attention, genuine contact with reality. Genuine art is always, in some sense, a report from the other side of the ordinary. It is a message from someone who has, for a moment, actually seen. And when we encounter it, we briefly share in that scene. We briefly occupy the perspective that the artist inhabited. We briefly experience the world as the thing that it actually is. Extraordinary, inexhaustible, alive with significance, rather than the thing that habituation has made it appear. Flat, familiar, manageable, and dull. This is why Pablo Picasso said that art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. The painting of a tree is not a tree. It is a lie about a tree. But the right lie about a tree, the lie made with genuine seeing, genuine love for the thing being seen, that lie can make you see the tree you have been walking past for years without noticing, with entirely new eyes. It can make the actual tree more real to you than it was before the painting. Not because the painting contains the tree, but because the painting teaches you how to look. And this is what every genuine philosopher, every genuine teacher, every genuine guide in the traditions of wisdom has been trying to do. Not to contain the truth in words, not to deliver the reality through concepts, but to teach you how to look, to arrange your attention in such a way that what was always already here becomes, finally, visible. I want to spend some time with the experience of grief, because grief is perhaps the most honest of emotions. Grief does not pretend. Grief does not manage. Grief strips away everything that is not essential and leaves you with the raw fact of loss, of love, of the absolute and irreversible reality of impermanence. And for this reason, grief, as terrible as it is, as genuinely painful as it is also one of the most clarifying experiences available to a human being, one of the most effective dissolvers of the ego's comfortable illusions. When you genuinely grieve, when you allow grief rather than managing it, when you let it move through you rather than containing it, when you are present to the full weight of what it is to love something and lose it, what happens is that the ordinary preoccupations of the ego become, for a while, impossible to take seriously. The career concerns and the social anxieties and the petty grievances and the small vanities, all of that falls away, or recedes so far that it becomes nearly invisible. And what remains is something much more essential. Love. The fact that you loved. The fact that what you lost mattered to you so deeply, that its absence is felt as a wound in the very substance of your being. And in that rawness, in that stripping away, something genuine becomes accessible that is not accessible in ordinary life. A directness of relationship with what matters, a clarity about what is real, a contact with the depths of your own being that the surface busyness of ordinary life rarely permits. This is not to romanticize grief. Grief is terrible. Grief is one of the hardest things a human being goes through. But it is also true that people who have genuinely grieved, who have gone through it rather than around it, often emerge with a quality of presence, a quality of appreciation for what remains, a quality of genuine contact with life that is different from what they had before. Not because grief is good, but because genuine contact with reality, even when reality is painful, deepens you, opens you, makes you in some sense more yourself. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse wrote about what he called repressive desublimation, the way in which modern culture offers endless, shallow gratification in order to prevent the deeper, more genuine satisfaction that would come from genuine engagement with life. The constant availability of entertainment and stimulation and distraction, the television, the social media, the endless content, these things do not make us more alive. They make us less alive by offering a substitute for the genuine aliveness that only genuine presence can provide. They are a kind of Novocaine for the soul, numbing the pain, but also numbing the joy, preventing the suffering that comes from genuine contact with reality, but also preventing the richness, the depth, the genuine satisfaction that only genuine contact can provide. And grief, unmanaged, genuine, allowed grief, is the antidote to this, not as a practice to be cultivated, but as a reality to be accepted when it arrives, not as something to be sought out, but as something to be genuinely undergone, rather than avoided when life offers it. Because in going through it genuinely, you discover something about yourself and about reality that cannot be discovered any other way. You discover that you are, as the poet Rilke said, larger than you thought, that you can contain more than you thought, that the depths in you are real depths, not just a metaphor, not just a nice idea, but actual territory, actual space, actual ground in which genuine things grow. Rilke spent much of his creative life exploring this territory. In his extraordinary Letters to a Young Poet, he wrote about the importance of living the questions rather than searching for answers, about the value of difficulty and solitude, and genuine engagement with the hard aspects of experience. He understood that the spiritual life, if you want to call it that, and he was not always comfortable with that word, is not a life of ease. It is a life of depth. And depth requires willingness to go down as well as up. Willingness to stay in the darkness rather than always rushing back to the light. Willingness to be, as he put it, a beginner in your own life, over and over again, at every age, in every new situation. And this connects to something I want to say about aging. Because we live in a culture that treats aging primarily as loss, as the progressive diminishment of the capacities that are valued, physical beauty, physical strength, quickness of mind, productivity, sexual attractiveness. All of these things that the culture prizes most highly are the things that aging takes away. And so aging is, in the dominant cultural narrative, essentially tragic. Something to be fought against as long as possible, and then reluctantly surrendered to when the fight can no longer be sustained. But this is only one story about aging, and it is not the deepest one. The deeper story, the story that the wisdom traditions of most human cultures have told, and that many individuals who have aged genuinely, gracefully, with full engagement rather than denial confirm, is that aging can involve a different kind of richness, a richness that is not available to the young, the richness of genuine perspective, the richness of having lived long enough to see patterns, to see how things turn out, to see the things that seemed desperately important turn out not to have mattered, and the things that seemed small turn out to have been the whole substance of life. The richness of having loved and lost enough times to know that love does not diminish with loss, but if anything, deepens. Of having been wrong enough times to be genuinely humble about certainty. Of having been surprised by life enough times to be genuinely curious about what comes next, rather than afraid. Of having accumulated not just years, but actual experience. Experience in the sense of having been fully present to what happened, having allowed it to form you, rather than just pass through you. This is what Jung called individuation, the process by which the personality becomes more genuinely itself over the course of a life, not by accumulating more characteristics or achieving more goals, but by discovering, gradually, what it actually is beneath the persona, beneath the roles and the performances and the social adaptations, the process by which the constructed self is progressively abandoned in favor of something more genuine, more rooted, more at ease with its own depths and its own limits. The process by which, if you are willing to do the work and take the risks and genuinely engage with your own experience, you become, over time, more yourself. And in becoming more yourself, paradoxically, more available to others, more genuinely connected, more genuinely present. This is not guaranteed. It is not automatic. There are people who age without individuation, who become more defended, more rigid, more brittle, whose personality contracts rather than expands over time, the result of a lifetime of avoiding genuine contact with experience, the result of the ego's strategy of management and control taken to its logical conclusion in the late years of life. An old person who is essentially still a young person's strategy in an old person's body, and finding that the strategy no longer works, and having no alternative to offer. But it is also not rare. The quality of genuine elder wisdom, which is recognizable when you encounter it, which is quite different from mere old knowledge. That quality is available to those who have genuinely lived their lives, who have genuinely been present to what happened, who have genuinely allowed experience to form them. And it is one of the most precious resources that any community or any culture can have. The kind of wisdom that only comes from having genuinely lived,
from having been genuinely present to love and loss and success and failure and the full range of what a human life contains. That wisdom cannot be taught to the young directly. It can only be pointed at. It can only be made available as a possibility. The young have to live their way into it, in their own time, through their own experience. But what the young can learn, what is genuinely teachable, is the attitude that makes genuine wisdom possible. The openness, the willingness to be affected, the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to not know, the courage to stay present with what is difficult rather than always finding a way to escape, the practice of genuine attention. These things, learned young and practiced consistently, make possible the kind of genuine aging that produces genuine wisdom. And these things, not learned, not practiced, not cultivated, these things, their absence, produces the diminished aging that is so common and so sad and so unnecessary. Let us turn now to the question of relationship, because everything we have discussed about the nature of the self, about consciousness, about the illusion of separation, all of it has its most immediate, most practical, most urgent expression in the domain of relationship, in how we encounter other people, in how we actually meet or fail to meet the other. The philosopher Martin Buber made a distinction that I think is one of the most important distinctions in the whole history of philosophical thought.
He distinguished between what he called the I-thou relationship and the I-it relationship. In the I-it relationship, the other, the person you are in relation with, is an object, an it, something to be used, understood, categorized, related to as a means to your ends. This is not necessarily malicious. It is not even always avoidable. We must relate to many people in functional, objective ways. The cashier at the supermarket, the person on the other end of a customer service call, the colleague whose task requires coordinating with yours. These functional relations are necessary and fine. But the I-it mode can become the dominant mode of all relationship, and when it does, something essential is lost. When every person you encounter is primarily an object, a function, a role, an instrument, a potential threat or ally, then you have no genuine meetings. You have contacts and transactions and negotiations and performances, but you do not have meetings. And without genuine meetings, without the genuine I-thou encounter, in which two beings actually meet, in which you are actually present to the reality of the other, rather than just your idea of them, in which something genuine is exchanged that cannot be reduced to information or utility. Without that, life becomes, however busy and successful on the surface, an extraordinary loneliness. The I-thou encounter, when it happens, even briefly, even between strangers, is unmistakable. It is the moment when the defenses drop, when the performance stops, when two people are genuinely present to each other without agenda. When you look at someone and actually see them, not what they represent, not what they can give you or take from you, not how they fit into your self-story, but them, actually them, in the full, irreducible mystery of their being. And they look at you and actually see you. And something happens in that mutual seeing that is unlike anything else, something that can only be called real. And this is love, in the truest sense. Not the romantic narrative, not the possession, not the dependency, not the projection of your own needs onto another person, but the genuine encountering of another reality as other, as genuinely themselves, as irreducibly present. The love that says, I see you, not I see in you what I need to see, or what I fear to see, or what my history has prepared me to see, but I actually see you. And what I see, I affirm. Not every specific thing you do or think or are. People are complicated, and love does not require the abandonment of discernment. But the fundamental fact of you, your being here, your being this, your being you. This kind of love is not sentimental. It is not sweet. It is not comfortable in the way that the possessive, projective love is comfortable.
Comfortable because it is really, at bottom, love of your own image rather than love of another. Genuine love is much more demanding and much more frightening because it requires you to be genuinely present to someone else's reality, which is always at least partly opaque, always at least partly beyond your comprehension, always at least partly surprising in ways that challenge your categories and your expectations. But it is also the most alive thing available in human experience. The moments of genuine contact, genuine meeting, genuine love. These are the moments that the dying, looking back, most consistently report as having mattered. Not the achievements, not the acquisitions, not the careers and the recognitions and the accumulations. The moments of genuine meeting. The moments of actually being with someone, actually seeing and being seen, actually present in the full sense of the word. And these moments are available always. Not just in romantic love, not just in deep friendship, not just in the great dramatic encounters of life.
They are available in the smallest interactions, in the briefest encounters, in the passing acknowledgement of a stranger on the street, in the moment when you pause in your busyness to actually look at the person who is speaking to you. The capacity for genuine meeting is always there. What prevents it is not any lack in the situation. What prevents it is the contracted, defended, always managing ego that cannot afford to be present, cannot afford to be genuinely open. Because openness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means risk, and risk means that the self you have so carefully constructed and maintained might, in a genuine encounter, be changed. And this is true. It will be changed. Every genuine encounter changes you. That is what genuine encounter means. You enter it as one person, and you emerge, however slightly, as another. The change might not be dramatic. It might not even be conscious. But genuine contact leaves traces. Genuine meeting creates something that was not there before. And the self that emerges from genuine relationship is richer, more flexible, more genuinely itself than the self that has managed to avoid genuine encounter through the careful maintenance of its walls. There is a beautiful paradox here that I want to name explicitly. The more genuinely you are yourself, the more fully you inhabit your own reality, the more honest you are about your own experience, the less you perform and manage and construct, the more genuinely you can meet others. And the more genuinely you meet others, the more genuinely you become yourself. Individuality and connection are not in tension. They are, in the deepest sense, the same movement. The more you are actually you, the more available you are to others. And the more genuinely you encounter others, the more you discover what you actually are. This is the paradox at the heart of all genuine spiritual teaching. You do not find yourself by withdrawing from relationship. You find yourself through it. You do not find the self by protecting it from the other. You find it by allowing the other to genuinely challenge, genuinely surprise, genuinely illuminate it. The self is not found by introspection alone. The self is found in the space between, in the quality of attention and presence that arises in genuine encounter, in the love that exceeds what any individual alone can generate, in the recognition that rings between two beings who have genuinely met. And at the largest scale, the scale at which the individual encounter with another person expands into the encounter with the whole of reality, the whole of the living, breathing, astonishing world. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of love as the fundamental nature of reality. Not the sentimental emotion, not the feeling that comes and goes, but love as the basic quality of genuine awareness, open, receiving, genuinely interested, genuinely moved, genuinely present to what is. The love that the universe has for itself when it is looking at itself clearly, which is what you are doing in any moment of genuine presence. The universe looking at itself and finding it good, finding it beautiful, finding it worthy of the extraordinary gift of awareness.
I want to speak about silence once more, because I think we have not quite finished with it. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is a presence. Silence is a quality of awareness. And genuine silence, the kind that is available in meditation, in deep nature, in the gaps between musical phrases, in the pause at the end of a genuine sentence. Genuine silence is not empty. It is full. Full of the thing that words and sounds and activity are always trying to express, and always, to some degree, failing to express, because what they are trying to express is not itself made of words or sounds or activity.
The philosopher monk Thomas Merton wrote beautifully about what he called the hidden wholeness, the unity that underlies the apparent fragmentation of the world, the silence that underlies all sound, the stillness that underlies all motion. He found it in the silence of the monastery, in the hours before dawn, when the world had not yet resumed its habitual noise, in the quality of attention that prolonged contemplative practice had cultivated in him. But he also, importantly, found it outside the monastery, in the faces of strangers on a street corner in Louisville, Kentucky, in an ordinary moment of unexpected recognition, in the flash of awareness that the separation he had been maintaining between himself and the world was a fiction, that the wholeness was here, outside the monastery walls, in the ordinary world, in the faces of ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, hidden but not absent, present but veiled, available, always available, to the awareness that is willing to be still enough to receive it. And this is the most important thing I want to say about silence. It is not a reward for special people in special circumstances. It is not the exclusive property of monks and mystics and mountain hermits. It is available here, now, in the midst of ordinary life, to the ordinary awareness that pauses long enough to notice that beneath the noise of the world and the noise of the mind, there is a silence that has always been there, that was there before the noise began, and will be there after the noise ends. That is, in fact, the ground of all noise, the condition of all sound, the space without which no sound could occur. The music theorist, John Cage, spent much of his creative life exploring the relationship between sound and silence. His most famous, or infamous, composition, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, is a piece in which a performer sits at a piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds without playing a single note. The audience, expecting silence, discovers that there is no silence, that the room is full of sound, the sound of breathing and coughing and shifting, and the traffic outside, and the ventilation system, and all the ambient sounds that are always present but never noticed, because the listening ear is always pointed toward the sounds that are meant to be attended to. But beneath even those ambient sounds, Cage was pointing toward something. The awareness that hears the sounds, the space in which the sounds occur, the listening itself, prior to any particular sound. That listening, that pure, open, receptive awareness, is itself a kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that receives sound without itself being a sound. The ground of hearing, the condition of music, the thing that was there before the first note and remains after the last. And this is what meditation cultivates, not the absence of thought, not the suppression of feeling, but the awareness of what receives thought and feeling without being identical to them. The silence that hears, the stillness that feels, the space that contains everything without being diminished by anything that occurs within it. Now, I want to come back to where we began. I want to come back to the question of what is happening inside your mind right now while you are listening to this. Because we have traveled far, through the nature of consciousness, through the illusion of the ego, through the question of meaning, through the reality of love and grief and beauty and silence. And I want to ask whether anything has shifted, not dramatically, not definitively, but slightly, in the way that a very slight change in angle can completely change what you are able to see. Is the present moment a little more present? Is the awareness you are using to listen to these words a little more obvious, a little more noticed?
a little less conflated with the content that it contains? Is the space around the thoughts a little more spacious? Is the silence between the sounds a little more audible? If any of that is true, even a little, then something real has happened in this conversation. Not a great mystical breakthrough, not an enlightenment experience, just a slight adjustment of attention, a slight shift of where you are looking, a slight opening of what was already open but had been forgotten to be open. And this is enough. This is more than enough, because attention, once genuinely directed, continues to work. The questioning, once genuinely begun, continues to unfold. The awareness that has been noticed once does not immediately forget that it was noticed. It leaves a trace, a residue, a slight loosening of the habitual grip. And over time, if you return to these questions, if you bring this quality of attention to ordinary life, if you sit sometimes in genuine silence and notice what is there, over time, the loosening accumulates, the opening deepens, the sense of the ground of being, which is always here but is covered by the activity of the ordinary mind, becomes a little more consistently available. And this is the spiritual life, properly understood, not a dramatic conversion experience after which everything is permanently different, not the achievement of a final state beyond which no further development is possible, but an ongoing deepening, an ongoing opening, a lifelong conversation between the surface self and the depths, a gradual, patient, never-finished process of becoming more genuinely yourself, more genuinely present, more genuinely alive. Not a destination, a way of traveling, not an arrival, a quality of movement. The Tao Te Ching says, in one of its most beautiful passages, that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But it also says something more subtle. It says that the sage does not hasten and yet arrives. The sage does not force and yet accomplishes.
The sage does not accumulate and yet has everything. Because the sage has understood something about the nature of reality that the ordinary person has not. That reality is already here, that consciousness is already present, that the ground of being is already the ground, and that the task is not to create something new, but to notice what has always been the case. This is not passivity. This is the most active possible engagement with reality, because it requires the giving up of the habitual defensive strategies, the giving up of the management and the control and the protecting of the self, and the stepping into genuine openness, genuine availability, genuine responsiveness to what is actually present. And this requires courage, genuine courage, not the courage of the soldier facing physical danger, but the quieter, more persistent courage of the person who is willing to be genuinely present when every habit of mind says, run, who is willing to feel what is actually here when the ego says, avoid, who is willing to not know when the anxiety of not knowing says, grab any available certainty and hold on. The courage of presence, the courage of openness, the courage of letting the world in rather than managing it from a safe distance. This is perhaps the rarest and most admirable quality in human beings, and it is available to everyone in every moment as a choice. Not a dramatic, once-in-a-lifetime heroic choice, but the small, daily, repeated choice to be actually here, actually present, actually available to the extraordinary reality of being alive. And when that choice is made, or when circumstances make it for you, or when you find yourself, as sometimes happens, suddenly and unexpectedly present in a way you were not before, what you find is not what the ego fears. What you find is not emptiness, not dissolution, not loss. What you find is fullness, the fullness of a moment that is completely itself, the fullness of awareness that has stopped contracting around the protection of an identity and is simply, openly, nakedly, here. And in that fullness, there is something that the traditions all point toward, with different words: bliss, peace,
joy, grace, presence, love. The inexhaustible richness of the present moment when it is genuinely inhabited. The sense, the direct, immediate, not derived from any argument sense, that this is right, that this is real, that this is what you are, that this is what has always been here, waiting patiently behind the noise of the seeking self, ready to receive you whenever you are ready to stop running and simply, quietly, be here. Welcome home. And take good care of the mystery. It is your own. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being exactly here.